Hello and welcome to Choose FI. Today on the show, we're going to walk through a workshop on overcoming self-limiting beliefs. And this is something that Jessica from the Fioneers has written about extensively on her blog. And I love how she put it in a post, conquer your self-limiting beliefs and become unstoppable. And that just jumped off the page to me. And I think realistically, limiting beliefs plague all of us. It's part of the human experience, from imposter syndrome to am I not wealthy enough, to am I not educated enough, to a whole list of hundreds of potential limiting beliefs. And what we're going to do today is really walk through an end-to-end workshop on how to overcome these limiting beliefs. And Jessica's here to help us with this. And we also have two Choose FI listeners, because Jessica put in the Facebook group, what limiting beliefs are holding you back from reaching a goal or making a change? And we had a whole number of our community members respond to that. Jess picked out two, and they're here with us today. We have Kyle and Samantha. And I think this is going to be really helpful for the broader community. And with that, welcome to Choose FI. Jess, it's always good to have you here. And this is twice in 3 months. I'm really, really excited. It's always good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, so the last one was wonderful. That was episode 472, and we called that The Cure for the Boring Middle. And that, again, was how I'm envisioning. I don't know if you use this word, but I've used it now 3 times, workshop. That's how I think about it. It's like this real iterative process of let's walk through this. And really, The Cure for the Boring Middle was fantastic. So if you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to episode 472, please listen to that right after this. It's so important for really this entire FI journey for us to, okay, we have our money set and everything's on autopilot. But man, there's a lot of years there. There could be 5, 10, 15 plus years. And that's where the good stuff happens. So Jessica did a marvelous job of helping us with that. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So Jess, why don't you jump off from here? So limiting beliefs, how do we think about this? How do you define them?
So, limiting beliefs are things that we believe to be true about ourselves, others, or how the world works that limit us from taking action or achieving our full potential. And limiting beliefs or fears are totally natural. Everyone has them. The most successful people in the world have them. They've just figured out how to work through them. Our brains have this natural response, right, that wants to keep us safe. And that's evolutionary because we didn't want to be attacked by tigers or, whatever could have happened, right? But that fear is natural. But now that natural response doesn't necessarily serve us anymore in this day and age. We still shy away from things that would not actually harm us because of that sort of evolutionary part of our brain that wants to keep us safe.
Okay. I like that. So, right, safety being the overriding goal of our human brains, basically. And therefore, we naturally we find these ideas in our head and just gravitate towards them, even if, and especially if sometimes like I think about this in terms of just like the comments that I get or the email responses that I get. I could get 499, oh my goodness, Choose FI changed my life. Like this is extraordinary. Thank you, to one negative email. And what do I focus on? I focus on the negative one. It's just, it is the way our brains work. And yeah, so I am very selfishly looking forward to this workshop for sure, because I think it really does. Plague might be a bit of an exaggeration, but maybe not so much. It does plague us all. So just, yeah, that's a great intro. And let's welcome our friends in here. So Samantha, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hi, Brad and Jessica. My name is Samantha. I'm a 43-year-old, recently divorced, single mom of 3 young kids. I work in finance and I have a rental property on the side, an investment that also boosts my income. I've always been passionate about personal finance and helping my girlfriends figure it out. And I'm 38% of the way towards FI at this point.
38%. I like how
Yeah.
specific that is. That's awesome.
Yes, I'm excited. I keep track of it in a spreadsheet, as I'm sure many of your followers do.
How long have you been on the path to FI?
Probably about 5 years, but I can remember as a teen, my first job, never spending everything I made. I always set aside 30 to 50% in savings and then later investments. I grew up with a lot of financial chaos. And so I tend to overcompensate by being extra responsible, extra careful, to the point of being sometimes obsessive. I'm kind of the person that like checks the apps constantly, like something may have changed in the last 10 minutes. So I'm hoping to work my way out of that and become more calm and easygoing and confident around money and eliminate the bag lady nightmares that I have.
So, Samantha, I'm really excited to talk through this because I know the limiting belief that you wanted to work through together on the show is around those financial fears and the fears of scarcity and this worry that you'll never reach financial independence, which is, I know, a worry that many people have because of the situations that they grew up in and the beliefs that they have. And so I'm positive that us working through this together and you sharing your story is going to help other people also work through that fear.
Yes, thank you. I think when I look at the spreadsheet and see it in black and white and it says you're going to retire early, you're going to be fine, there's always a path B. It's like my brain just doesn't believe it and still feels like I have to do more, do more, do more.
Yeah, Samantha, really nice to meet you. I'm so glad you're here. And yeah, it's funny because I want to jump ahead and be like, oh, wow, you're 38% to your number. But really, that means you're so much farther, right? Like using the concept of coast fine. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I'm excited for you. And I think this is going to be really, really helpful. Like Jess said, not only for you, but for the community. So, all right, Kyle, let's shift over to you. So give us a quick introduction and then we'll talk about your limiting belief.
Sure. So I'm Kyle. I'm not quite as specific at 38%. I'm not sure exactly where we fall on that, but I'm 37. We've got two young daughters. Our oldest will be 3 tomorrow, and then we've got a 6-month old. And so my wife, we just got placed in Chicago. She's a physician, and growing up, very similar to Samantha, grew up in not the best environment for finances. And so what I will say is I grew up with a scarcity mindset. And then the last 5 years, I switched over to sales, and it's been really, 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 really good. And so that's where my limiting belief will come in that we'll talk about later is I've now transitioned not doing as much work. And that's where I still feel like a scarcity mindset's coming in that area.
Sure. So, yeah, Kyle, I'm really excited to dive into this because in some ways you've already taken a step and made some sort of transition, which is fantastic. And at the same time, it goes to show that the limiting beliefs that we have don't necessarily go away once we make the change. We have to continue working through them because they'll come up again and again and again. And so excited to have this discussion about scaling back work and still feeling this scarcity mindset and needing to work through that.
Thank you. Yes, I'm super excited for it as well.
Yeah, this should be great. So, Jess, we already kind of talked about the real high level of what are limiting beliefs, but I guess my next question would be, how do we identify them? How do we look for them in our lives?
Yeah. So, the thing that I would recommend doing if you want to identify your limiting beliefs is to start with big goals or dreams that you have. And in some ways, it doesn't actually matter what these big goals or dreams are because the same limiting beliefs are likely to come up regardless of what these big goals or dreams are. And so think about those things. It could be you want to reach financial independence, could be one of those goals. It could be that you want to become an entrepreneur, you want to change careers, you want to run a marathon, climb Mount Everest, travel in the van for a year, right? Like any of those things. So list those, write those down, and then ask yourself a few questions. One, what could hold me back from doing this? What am I worried or nervous about? And why do I keep putting this off? Right? Why am I not taking action? What are the things that are coming up in my brain? And I actually would encourage you to pull out a notebook and write down as many limiting beliefs as you possibly can think of about each one of those goals. And this is a process that I actually do on an annual basis. And so I do an annual planning process every year where I consider my life vision, I create goals for the year, and then I look at them and I say, what could hold me back? What am I worried about? Like, what would keep me from taking the first step toward these goals? And I write down anywhere between 30 and 50 limiting beliefs every year and then work through each one. And it is an incredibly powerful thing to do.
Wow, that is wild. So 30 to 50 limiting beliefs, but the starting point, just so I understand and the listeners understand, the starting point are your goals for the year. And then there can be many or multiple, let's say, limiting beliefs for each goal.
Yes, exactly. And there usually are many limiting beliefs for each goal. And limiting beliefs can be anything, right, that holds you back from achieving that goal. And it's a belief about yourself, it's a belief about others, or a belief about how the world works. So, a couple examples of that would be I'm not smart enough to do X. Or for me, I'm someone who has a high level of anxiety. And so sometimes my limiting beliefs are tied to that. That's like my anxiety is going to hold me back from doing this thing that I want. Right. Or the limiting beliefs about others are sometimes like, well, if I reach out and ask for help on this particular thing, this person is going to believe that I'm not capable of doing this myself. Or someone else can talk about this thing and knows a lot more about this thing than I do, so I shouldn't write a book. Or limiting beliefs about how the world works. Some examples of those are I shouldn't be happy if other people in the world are suffering. Or there's not enough time and there will never be enough time. So those are some of the examples of limiting beliefs. And I guess one more that I was just thinking of was if I don't know I'm going to be successful, I shouldn't even start. That's a good one that I think holds me and a lot of people back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how just hearing them sometimes, just brainstorming them can make you realize like that one with time. The second you said that, I'm like, oh, I think that's one of my triggers because there's never enough time. Even though by any objective measure, I have a ton of time, but my brain defaults to, oh, I'm too busy. There's not enough time. The days are running. I never get enough done. Like that is instantly where my brain goes to. And yeah, you can just Google. I literally Googled a couple articles like examples of limiting beliefs and I got 62 self-limiting beliefs and like I'm not good enough, I'm too old or too young, I don't have enough time, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough experience, I'll never be successful, I don't have enough money, I'll never be one of the best, I'm not talented enough. Things like that are some of the more common ones. So just for you out there listening, just Google that or we'll try to put something in the show notes if we can come up with a list here. But just having that list, I find for my own brain just helps significantly.
So, before we dive into the conversation with the community, let's talk about the 6 strategies to overcome and work through the limiting beliefs. And I want to share a simple example from my own life of a limiting belief over the last week that I had so that I can work through these steps and you can all see this example.
Perfect.
So, the simple example that I want to share is I recently moved. So, about 2 weeks ago, I moved from my house of 10 years in Boston to northern New Hampshire. And in the move, I have misplaced some of my notebooks that have notes from clients who I've worked with. And I'm also writing a book right now. And I want to write about a few of these clients in the book, but I'm missing the notebooks that their notes are in.
Yes.
So my limiting belief was this. If I reach out to past clients and ask if they would be willing to share their notes with me, they'll think I'm disorganized and don't value our relationship. So that is the limiting belief that I was having that actually held me back for a couple of days. Like I didn't make any progress on my writing. And I searched and searched and searched and searched and opened every single box in my house to try to find these notebooks. And for the life of me, I cannot find them. Okay. So let's walk through the 6 strategies. So the first strategy I call flip the script. And to flip the script, and this is the simplest strategy, it's to say the opposite and just see if you can believe that it's true. Okay. So for this, I would say if I reach out to past clients and ask for their notes, they won't think that I'm disorganized and they won't think that I don't value our relationship. Okay. Sometimes you can say the opposite thing and believe that it's true. Other times, most of the time, the strategy is not enough. Right. And so we need to continue to like tick down the list of strategies. Okay. So then the second strategy is to look for evidence. Right. And so to ask yourself, what evidence do I have that this limiting belief is or is not true? And I think it's important to actually look at both, right? What evidence do I have that it's not true? But in cases where I have evidence that it is true, what are the particular circumstances of those cases?
Interesting. So in this case, you would dive into your own kind of introspective thoughts on whether you are or are not a disorganized person.
Yeah, exactly. Or if people would think that, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. So, in terms of the evidence, then, so when I ask myself this question, what evidence do I have that this is or isn't true? I think one piece of evidence I have is that I think people generally know that moving is difficult. And that if I've only been in my house for less than 2 weeks, they probably won't hold it against me if I can't find my notebooks. Right. So I think that's one piece of evidence. Like if someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, I moved 2 weeks ago and I can't find my notes. Do you have notes that you could share with me?" I would be like, "Sure, I totally get it. Moving's hard." Right. So that's one thing. And then another one. So on the flip side, right, in support of this limiting belief, right, I have worked in certain contexts where I have seen people be penalized for being disorganized, right? But usually it's that they're disorganized and they're unable to solve the problem in front of them, right? Like they can't figure out a solution to the problem in front of them because they don't have the information. And in this case, one, I'm my own boss, so no one's going to penalize me for it. And two, I have a way to solve this problem, which is to ask people for their notes. And so, sometimes we're all a little bit disorganized at work, but if we can solve the problem, it's usually okay. So then there was one last piece of evidence that I thought about was that people might actually be excited and feel valued if I reach out to them and let them know that I want to feature them in my book and ask them for my notes. So those were the three pieces of evidence that I thought about for this, which then got me a little bit closer to saying, okay, I think I can reach out to them and ask for their notes.
No, that makes sense. And right, in this case, it's funny because where my brain would have went was to try to find confirming or disconfirming evidence that I was or was not disorganized in essence. Whereas you looked at the ramifications of it, what they would think about you. And I guess you theoretically could look at either side, right? But I guess you're more worried in this case, which suggests to me that you don't think you're disorganized. You're actually worried about how they're going to react in this case, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to how I articulated the limiting belief. I didn't say, I'm so disorganized. Like I'm a terrible person because I'm so disorganized. It was, if I reach out to them, they're going to think I'm disorganized and that I don't value our relationship.
Yeah.
So the limiting belief for me was more about how they would react to me.
Got it. Okay. That makes perfect sense. So that was the second one, look for evidence. The third is ask questions.
Yes. So someone once said to me that the way that they combat their inner critic is by inviting them in for like coffee and conversation. And I actually really liked that metaphor. And so I've like used that and thought through that. It's almost like at a certain point, right? If I look at evidence and I'm still like, okay, I still need a little bit more to like believe that this is true. I think about having this like internal dialogue between my inner critic and my inner coach, which I know is pretty meta, right? Maybe it's like the person who's like, you suck at everything versus like, you can work through this. Let's figure it out kind of thing. And my inner coach is asking questions with compassionate curiosity. Okay. So asking, why do I believe that this is true? Like, where does this belief come from? What's the real issue here? What's the worst thing that could happen? And if that thing happened, would I still be okay? Right? So, for example, like, what if I did reach out to past clients? And what if someone did think that I was disorganized and therefore didn't value my relationship with them? What's the worst thing that would realistically happen? Very little, right? They're very unlikely to go online and post a bad review saying a coach that I worked with 2 years ago moved 2 weeks ago and lost her notes, right? They're going to say, okay. And if I needed to build back up the trust in that relationship, I do actually feel confident that I could. And I don't think that I'll need to, right? And then I ask, like, what's the most likely thing to happen? And then my favorite question, and this is one that we'll ask as we do this roundtable, is if a friend, someone you really cared about, came to you and shared this limiting belief, what would you tell them? Because it's so easy to be our own worst critic and to hold ourselves to these impossibly high standards. But if, my best friend were to come to me and say, "Oh, I'm so worried I lost my notes. People are going to think I'm so disorganized and then, I'm a terrible coach and I don't value their relationship." I would say, "That's crazy. Please don't worry about it. Ask them for their notes and see if they have them because they are not going to be offended by you moving 2 weeks ago and needing to ask them for notes." Right? So that's part of the process that I go through for asking questions. Okay, so those are really the 3 steps to work through the limiting belief. And then the next step is to take it and to articulate an empowering belief. So, what's the thing that I actually want to believe instead in this situation? Like, after I've worked through it, what do I now believe? Even if what I now believe is just this is what I believe logically in my brain, even if I don't yet feel it,
Okay.
I don't yet truly, like, deep down believe that it's true. And so in this case, I said, if I reach out to past clients and ask if they would be willing to share their notes with me, they will likely extend me grace, be honored to be included in my book, and enthusiastic to share their notes with me.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah. And step 5 is to test it. Test your new empowering belief. And the key here is, like, sometimes I think we believe we need to, like, sit around and, like, wait until we feel confident to take action on it. But I think the key to building confidence is actually taking the action, and then the confidence follows. And so you test the new empowering belief, by taking action and moving forward as if you believed that thing to be true. And then you build new evidence for yourself.
Interesting. So testing it. Are we talking like in this hypothetical that might not be a hypothetical, like going to one of your clients and asking that kind of testing?
Yeah, so this is not a hypothetical. I did go and ask 4 clients for their notes, and 3 of them still had their notes and shared them with me and said, "Oh, I'm so honored that you wanna feature me in your book."
Amazing.
And one of them couldn't find his notes, and that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's that piece, and then the 6th strategy is to not go it alone, right? It's that you can do this in the context of a supportive community. I didn't necessarily need to, like, do all of these steps all by myself. I could actually enlist other people, right? So I actually talked to my husband about it, and he was like, "Great, let me help you search through the boxes." And we couldn't find them, and he said, "Why don't you just reach out to other people and see if they have their notes?" Right? Because sometimes when you talk to other people, they're more likely to see a solution and not have that same inner critic voice telling you all the reasons why you shouldn't do that. So, the 6 strategies to recap are to flip the script, look for evidence, ask questions, articulate a new empowering belief, test that new empowering belief, and work through it with a supportive community.
Okay, that's wonderful. And it's interesting how easily number 6 segues into what we're doing here, right? So, a supportive community that truly is the FI community and certainly the Choose a FI community. And we have a roundtable here to help us work through some of these limiting beliefs. So, Jess, why don't you take us from here in terms of getting this roundtable started with Samantha and Kyle?
Awesome. So, what we're going to do in this roundtable is work through each of your limiting beliefs. And so, first, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit of context for what the limiting belief is. And then we're going to walk through the strategies. So, how might you flip the script on it? What evidence do you have? Right? And what questions can we ask? And then once we do that, I'm going to open it up to our whole group so that all of us can share ideas of how might we think about this? Are there alternative ways? Are there other questions that we might ask to help the person think through it? And then once we have that discussion, we'll go back and ask the person to share their empowering belief after this conversation. Okay. So let's start with Samantha. So, Samantha, you told us about this sort of limiting belief around scarcity of feeling like I'll never reach financial independence as a single mom. Can you tell us a little bit more context about this limiting belief and where it's coming from for you?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. I believe it's coming from the fact that there are not a lot of role models in the FI community that are either single parents or divorced. Most of the folks that I see in our community are single people without children or they're married. And so, there's just massive additional costs to living alone. Like people refer to it as the single tax. I have my home and my utilities, et cetera, to bear the brunt of on my own. And in this economy, everyone knows that's not easy to do. And then 3 kids, they're young kids. And so I have a long ways to go to continue to provide daycare for them and all the expenses that come with children. So I think the lack of role models for me has been challenging. Prior to getting a divorce, I felt very confident about reaching FI, and it was a point of pride in my life.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. So it sounds like the limiting belief is now that I'm single and doing this as a single parent, that it'll be a lot more difficult or you won't be able to reach financial independence.
Correct.
How might you flip the script on that?
So I thought about it a lot, and the statement I came up with was obviously I'll achieve FI because I'm a single mom.
Okay, that's a great one. So then let's talk through, and I'm sure we'll get more into that as we get into evidence and questions. So let's dive into evidence. Tell us, what evidence do you have that the limiting belief is or is not true?
Yeah, this was a good one. I spent a lot of time in my notebook going through this, and the evidence that I found is like, I just really thought about I really tried to find role models and I couldn't. So instead of trying to find evidence in other role models, I tried to find evidence within my own self. And the evidence that I came up with is that I've made good decisions my whole life around money and around hustling when things get bad, and that I've dug myself out of problems before. And so the evidence I wrote down was I put myself through college financially. I got advanced degrees. I made it through divorce. And it was, that first year after divorce is very tricky for people because they don't know what their final income and expenses are going to be. I was so grateful to jump on the YNAB bandwagon, and that helped me. And the book Simple Path to Wealth helped me so much. The other evidence I wrote down was that I have a robust rental business. And just kind of overall, when I look back on my life, I've made good decisions, solid decisions financially.
Awesome. That's excellent evidence.
Yeah. Oh, you're making me like teary now.
Yeah.
It's because it's just about trusting yourself. It's about, I can't promise that corporate America isn't going to let me go someday. I can't promise I'm not going to have a medical issue someday, but I can trust myself that if anything massive happens, that I will be able to hustle my way out of it.
Wow. I love the difference in just how much you sound like you believe it just based on that last little bit there. That's incredible. Like because
Yeah.
you do have that evidence that you've done this in the past, right? And that's what's so cool about it. And obviously I'm going to get out of the way here in a minute, but not to mention you're 38% of the way to FI. You've only been on the
Yeah.
FI path for I think you said about 5 years. That's incredible. Are there any maybe numbers that could be aside from that? Like do you have like a savings rate that you could point to? Or I know
Yeah.
obviously it's much harder post divorce, but is that something that could add
No,
to?
in some ways, when Jessica encouraged us to journal about this extensively, and I took it seriously, and I sat down and like quietly, really thought about this. In some ways, it is easier to be divorced because although the second income isn't there, you also don't have someone's second opinion. And I have nothing negative to say about my ex in terms of his decision making with money, but I imagine many divorced folks had fights about money and about where money should go and how money should be spent. And one of the benefits of being a single mom is I don't have anybody else's opinion to think about. I can make the decisions on my own. I can cut corners where I want to cut corners. I can invest in the stock market in the stocks that I want to invest in. And so that is a great benefit to being single. So that has been very helpful. And as I mentioned before, like I thought about how even when I was a teenager, I was always setting aside a chunk of my paycheck, just knowing that there would be expenses in the future to think about. And I think, and maybe Kyle can touch on this too. When you grow up in some chaos, I think it can go one of two ways. You kind of either follow what your parents did, or you rebel against them and do the opposite of what they did. And so I've always just been very careful and nervous about money.
Yeah. And actually, I want to open this up. This is a great time to invite Kyle or Brad or anyone to jump in and say, have you thought about this? Is there a particular question or way you might think about it? One question I have for you, Samantha, is I think you told us, what is your savings rate right now?
So my savings rate right now is I invest about 30% of my take home pay using this, again, the simple path to wealth strategy. So most of it goes to VTSAX. And then I save on top of that 10%, and that goes towards long term savings goals such as vacations, taxes, new car, home repair, multi year type saving goals. So all in, that's a 40% savings rate after taxes, which I'm
Yeah.
really proud of.
As well, you should be.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to say to that is just like, congratulations. Like you
Thank
are
you.
saving 40% of your income as a single mom of 3, and that is incredible. And there are so many people who are coupled and who aren't doing that.
Yeah. And I look back and I think about how when I was married, we had an opportunity to get a bigger house, get a bigger car, get new cars, do this, do that. And I'm so glad that I made the decision to stay in a small home and stay at that, 2.5% interest rate and not move just because we could afford it. I live in a small, modest house, and that has been such a key to being able to save this way. I also paid off my car, and it's a Honda. I'm going to drive it into the ground. And so I stay within my means. I also travel hack to be able to travel internationally multiple times a year and not pay for it. So when I think about the big decisions I've made in my life about the big expenses like housing, cars, etc., that is where I've really focused. And so then when I spend on things like clothes or my nails or going out with girlfriends, I can do it more liberally because I have such a smaller house payment.
Yeah, I just want to applaud you. So I come from a divorced house too, and to see the trauma inflicted on our family, I just want to give you so much kudos. Like to have a 40% savings rate just in general is insane. I think your kids are learning a lot from you, and you should give yourself a lot of grace because you're doing awesome, from my perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly from my perspective as well. It's really remarkable. And what I was saying before, like using maybe Jess's famous concept of coast fi and just looking at like, oh wow, I'm already 38% to my fi number as I'm understanding it. And I have a 40% savings rate. That's crazy. I mean, if you think about even if you had a 0% savings rate right now, all that money would be working in the background. And in another approximately 8 or 9 years, your net worth would double. And another 8 or 9 years, it would double again. So it would literally be 4 times what it is today in about 18 years with a 0% savings rate. If you were just living, and even if, let's say, your income went down or something, or your expenses went up, whatever it may be, and you were just covering your expenses, in about 18 years, your net worth would be quadruple what it is today. So think about what your net worth will be in a shorter period of time with a 30 to 40% savings rate.
It's mind blowing, and it's hard to accept and believe the numbers on the page when I see them. I did the calculations recently and realized that I was coast FI, and it's hard to believe and it's hard to stop socking money away every time I get a bonus or a refund or a rent payment. Like I just keep not looking at it and tossing it into VTSAX.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's okay too. You don't have to
Yeah,
beat yourself
right,
up about
right.
saving, obviously, but I think the thing to avoid is the scarcity mindset,
Yeah.
right? So if you're doing it from a place of fear,
Mhm.
that's something different than this is to reach my goals in a shorter period of time. Or if you're doing it very intentionally, then that's wonderful, right? I mean, I still
Yeah.
have a savings rate. Nobody's like poo pooing having a savings rate, but I think it's that subtle mindset shift. So if it's from a place of scarcity, I would say that's something to really dig into.
Yeah. I also just want to recognize I understand people listening to this. I come from a place of privilege because I'm old enough that I bought my house prior to interest rates going up. I'm an elder millennial, and so I'm probably the last of the generation that got that housing, was able to housing hack with low interest rates. And I want to recognize that because I know a lot of your listeners are younger, and that is hard. I also want to recognize my privilege in that my ex-husband is financially solid. And so I don't have to pay child support. I don't have to worry about that. Him and I can cover our children's expenses comfortably. And that's been excellent. I know a lot of divorced people don't have that and have to kind of carry the weight of their spouse. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah. So, Samantha, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to turn it back to you and ask you to articulate what is the empowering belief that you could share with us now that we've worked through this and shared some additional ideas with you.
Yeah. Well, when I asked my questions that you had posed, such as like, what's the worst that can happen? To me, it would be like a corporate layoff or a medical issue. And so the empowering belief that I hold now is that I can do this. I'm capable of this. I have made good decisions in the past. I can trust myself to pivot and adjust as needed. And that was the sentence that kept coming back is I can trust myself to pivot and adjust if something happens.
Yes. And you have tons of evidence
Yeah.
that you have done that in the past. So, I love that.
Thank you.
So I want to turn now to Kyle and the limiting belief that you shared with us. So you are in a slightly different situation where you sort of dealt with some of this scarcity mindset to a place where you could make a shift to downshift in the work that you're doing. But some of these limiting beliefs still come up. So tell us a little bit more about the transition that you made and what are those limiting beliefs that keep coming up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jess. So, for context, I grew up in an area, great people, Midwest, but everybody was kind of paycheck to paycheck. You're one accident away from going under. I saw cars repossessed, I saw houses repossessed. That was my upbringing. And so, fast forward a little bit, I did very well, in school, undergrad, graduate school. I had about 140 grand of student loan debt in 2019. And I'm a chiropractor. And I just said, you know what? I can't make the income as an associate doctor and pay off all of this debt. So I switched to sales in 2019. So from February that year to Halloween, I had paid off all of 6 figures of debt. And then from there, I got involved. I started listening to Choose FI religiously. Like, Brad, you were in my ear more than you even know, man. So my transition point has been the last 5 years has been great for sales. But once we had our second daughter, my wife is a physician. So at that point, I recognized, you know what? We're going to be okay financially. I need to take the pedal off the metal, not work 80 hours a week, not just kill it. And I really need to go and be there for my family. And so my limiting belief is now, this probably crosses gender stereotypes, but as a man, I feel like I'm not financially providing for my family like I was. Even though in my head, I know this is the most important thing I can do in this season of life, I feel like by taking my foot off the accelerator, I'm not being the provider that I should be.
That's a really powerful one. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think there's so many people who would be able to identify with that feeling of saying, if I take the foot off the gas, then I'm being irresponsible, or I'm not being the person that other people need me to be if I decide to do this scaling back. So I'm actually curious how you start working through this. So, how would you flip the script?
I would flip the script by saying, I can always work more hours, I can always make more money, but I can never make more time. And so I need to recognize in this season of life with two kids under 3, this is the most important thing I could be doing, is pouring into them and, working from home, working less than 20 hours a week. Like, this is my job right now. This is what I have to do right now.
Okay, so then let's talk about evidence, right? So as you think about, if you're saying like, if I take my foot off the gas, or having taken my foot off the gas, I am not being the provider that my family needs me to be. What evidence do you have that that statement is or is not true?
I think when I came to reflect on this, it was very limited in my mindset. So being a provider is way more than just financial, right? So being there for them, eventually going to sporting events, coaching them, taking them to and from daycare, like all of these things are still providing, doing a lot of the grocery shopping or cooking the meals, cleaning the home, like that stuff is still providing. It's just, and I think I don't know if this is sexist to say, but as a man, I feel like I need a scorecard. I need to be able to see, hey, these are the things I can put my finger to that I've done. And it's really hard to do that as a parent. It's a thankless job, right? So,
I love how you got there with there's a different definition of the word provider. And it's funny because that was literally what I just took notes on and wanted to kind of grill you about, but you're already there, right? It's I'm not being the provider I should be. Well, but that presupposes that the only way to provide is just via money.
yep.
And I think, as you surmise, that is just like a fundamentally flawed way of looking at it, right? That's an old school way of looking at it, that the only way to provide is via money. And there are all these other ways that you are providing for your kids, right? And I think that's another like beautiful aspect of the Phi community is we think a little bit differently. We don't fall back on, hey, this is what society says, and you can be open-minded to new ideas and new ways of living. So, I applaud you. I think it's wonderful. Like you said, you can't get that time back, and it's really a marvelous thing to be able to spend that time with your family. And yeah, it's interesting. So I think the definition of the word provider is something we should keep in the back of our minds.
And I think you talk about all the time, Brad, that financial independence is a superpower because it gives you options. Like, I wouldn't have had this flexibility had we not saved really well for 4 to 5 years and invested and made good money and was smart with it. So all the information from your podcast, from the Choose FI community it's changed the trajectory of my family's life. So I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, that's amazing. And listen, another piece of evidence that you provided was you had, I think you said $140,000 of debt, and you paid that off in a tiny, tiny, tiny little timeline, right? That's not insignificant at all. And you have to, again, if we're looking for those pieces of confirming evidence, that's just another check mark. If you wanted to go to the money side, right? Like if for some reason you were hell bent on it needs to be money, okay, you did pretty good there. And like you said, you've been following the path to 5 for a number of years. It sounds like you guys are doing great. Like check, 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 all those little check marks in your corner. It's really pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, and I can open it up now too. So Samantha, if you want to jump in here in a second. One thing that I would say too is I feel like there's a similar feeling that sort of crosses everybody in a relationship, right? So for me, I had a period of time where I scaled back work while my husband was working still full time. And I remember having this feeling of being like, I am not contributing, or like I'm not contributing enough, right? So I had that sort of similar limiting belief. And I remember actually talking to my husband about it because I would often get comments on my blog that were like, well, you're not contributing financially, blah, 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 right? All of those things. And one, I was. contributing financially. He was just contributing more than I was financially at that time. However, he also gave me another way to think about it that was like, you're actually doing the work to like design the life that we want long term, right? So for me, I had scaled back to focus on building a business that would allow us to be location independent, which was our goal. And so for him, he was saying, like, I actually see the like total amount of money that we make together as like a unit. And we have our finances combined. That's helpful for me to think about because we sort of look at the total income as like our household doing all of everything that needs to be done in our household. Like we are making this amount of money combined. And now things have shifted where I'm focusing more on business and generating income. And he took a year sabbatical, right? And is now building up his own stuff entrepreneurial wise. And also knowing like you may take turns at that during life as well. And that's okay, right? Like you don't necessarily always need to be contributing equally the same exact stuff to the relationship.
And I should give credit to my wife. During that time period, we lived off of her residency salary, which isn't, it's like 60 grand, but we basically lived like we were college students. All of my income went to student loans. All of her money went to our living expenses. So she was a huge asset in that way. I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a single person, like with kids, I can attest that, Kyle, maybe you feel like you're not contributing by depositing income into the account, but you're saving money. Like I pay for snow service, lawn service, housekeeper. I, will have to pay for conveniences because there's only one of me. So maybe I'm like buying Instacart or things like that. There are absolutely ways that stay-at-home parents can save money for the entire family.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way of looking at it. So not only are you reducing expenses, but also think about the cost of childcare, right? If we really want to be like ultra specific, you can literally put a dollar sign next to the quote unquote jobs you're doing. We don't want to do that necessarily, but if you really felt a desperate need to do it, I mean, it's tens upon tens of thousands of dollars a year, not only in terms of childcare, but all the things that Samantha just laid out that you would be spending more because you simply wouldn't have the time to do it. So, I mean, let's be clear. There is a significant bottom line dollar figure on what you are providing. And that word very specifically chosen, right?
Thank you.
So I think what would be awesome to do now, Kyle, is could you transform the limiting belief into an empowering belief?
Yes. My empowering belief is that although I can't financially put a number on it, the value I'm providing to our family currently, there shouldn't be a number that's put on it because it's for forever. The seeds I'm building into our kids. I wrote a book last year specifically to my two daughters. Like if I get hit by a bus, I want them to have all these principles to live by in life. And I'm doing the things to pass on, even financially we'll pass on some stuff, but I'm doing more seeds that will pass on to them. So my empowering belief is that I am doing enough. Even if I can't put a financial number on it, I know what I'm doing for my family is what I should be doing currently.
Awesome. I love that.
Thanks.
So, Brad, it's time to put you on the hot seat for this conversation. So, we wanted to talk through one particular limiting belief, and I actually want you to share a little bit more about that with us, and then we'll dive into some strategies.
Okay, cool. So the fun thing is I haven't gone through any of the strategies. I've just really thought of the limiting belief. And actually, you and I worked through this because even the way that I initially thought of it was maybe ever so slightly different than the actual reality. So maybe I'll even start with what I thought of originally, which is something to the effect of like, I have this nebulous thought that I've like never really given my all to something that like almost like things maybe I don't know if they come easy to me because that's not exactly what it is, but like I never felt like I've given 100% to accomplish a goal. So that's kind of like where I started, but then when you and I dug into it a little bit, it was maybe more specifically like I'm not doing enough and I should be doing more to accomplish goals and that there's always something missing.
Yeah. So, I just want to reflect this back to you because it sounds like the limiting belief is I believe that I should be doing more. That, like, if I'm giving my best, I should be giving 120% instead of 100%. Like, I should be going all out and giving everything that I have.
Yes, that is exactly it. So, right. The interesting thing is internally, it's not about the results because I actually think the results in my life have been like shockingly good compared to, again, what I picture as the inputs because of this limiting belief that I should be doing more or that I have more to give.
Yeah,
Does
yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the first strategy. How would you flip the script? Like, this feels like this is gonna be a stickier one, that flipping the script might not be the strategy that works.
Yeah.
Let's just try it.
Well, yeah, this is kind of where it does get sticky because like my mind then like always wants to go to like, oh, but look, the results have been great. So like Jess, I'm gonna need your help on this actually. Like in terms of knowing what you know about what I just said, like how would you attempt to flip the script on this?
Yeah, I think I would flip the script by saying, "I'm doing enough." Like, I've done, putting in what were my best efforts was enough, is probably how I would flip it. But also, I think, like, this one is tricky, right? And so we can say that, but, like, either of those statements of flipping the script, we don't necessarily believe are true yet. So I want to actually dive into evidence here. And I think we're going to ask a couple different questions about evidence. I actually want to ask a specific question, which is, what evidence do you have that people should be giving all of themselves all the time? And the flip side, do we have evidence of the opposite?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I have any evidence that somebody should be giving all of themselves all of the time. In fact, I would probably point, yeah, like if somebody said that out loud to me, I would say that sounds a little crazy. Whoever told you that you have to give 100% of everything you have at every given moment? That's kind of antithetical to what advice I would give, certainly.
Yes. And actually, I want to make sure that Samantha and Kyle know that they can speak up here too, because
Yeah.
I feel like we're getting into the discussion piece of it. And I would actually share evidence from my own life that it's not good to give 100% all of the time for everything. And I did. And what happened was that led to severe burnout, severe anxiety and depression, and the need for me to take like 6 months completely off of work to recover from burnout because I actually believed that that limiting belief was true, right? That I should be giving 100% of myself at all times when, like, I feel like I've come to realize that I get to prioritize the things that I give myself to, and I can choose to give 100% of myself in certain situations, but that giving 80% and getting like a B in some areas that don't matter as much to me is completely fine, still passing, and is going to help me maintain my sanity.
Yeah, absolutely. If we gave 100% all the time to everything, it wouldn't be our 100%. It would be you can't give 100% all the time. Just mathematically, it would then become your average, which is then 50%. So that's what my therapist told me when I worked on this issue of perfectionism, which I think is, Brad, sounds like what it's rooted in.
Yeah.
And I think if you dug deeper, that instead of saying, I'm not doing enough, if you kept going with that, you may discover that your actual limiting belief is, I am not enough. Because if you felt like you were enough, you wouldn't have to kind of like prove to the world constantly with your productivity that you were here. So I also struggle with
Yeah.
productivity and busyness and perfectionism.
I love that. That's really, really helpful. And I wonder, as you were talking, I was thinking, I wonder if there's some aspect of guilt layered in here that maybe I feel guilty that I have had such, I mean, it sounds weird to say it out loud, but like extraordinary results in my life in a lot of different aspects, while internally having this mindset of like, you don't really give your all. And like things are still really good. I'm not articulating this right, but like, I think there's some aspect of guilt as well.
Okay, so I want to dig into a question here. What evidence do you have that you're not giving your all?
It's just an internal sense. I don't know. Like I think back to just like little one-off situations, just things that I'm disappointed in myself. Like something as simple as never really learning how to speak Japanese fully, like and fluently, because I feel like I just gave up on it and I didn't work that hard at it. And it was just like so silly, down to like, I think I would have been like a really good runner. And like I've always had this limiting belief that, oh, I hate running, I'm not going to do it. And yet, like, whenever I go out and run, I'm actually quite good. And it's limited me, like in my playing soccer, which was like my one real love growing up. And so again, I have all these like things, this like maelstrom, as you can tell. It's kind of disjointed because I've never really thought it through, but it's like it's all part and parcel of the same thing in essence. And then it even continues to today about Choose FI. Like there are so many amazing things that have come from Choose FI. And obviously I've spent thousands of hours, but like I think I'm still frustrated with myself for the things that I haven't done with it. So that's where my mind goes.
I can relate with that a lot, Brad. The perfectionism aspect, feeling like I always have more to give. I always feel like part of me could be doing something else. Like there's an opportunity cost. If I'm doing this, then I'm not doing this, right? I have that a lot too. One thing I was thinking, though, I've heard you say a lot on the podcast, we appreciate that you get every email and you read every email. But at a certain point, that can just be overwhelming. So, what would it look like maybe to offload some of these tasks that could be taken off of your plate to free yourself up to do? And maybe part of my thought was too, maybe it's not that you're not doing enough. Maybe it's you're not doing enough of the things that you enjoy and that light you up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so digging back in on that, I had another follow-up question on this, which is this goes back to how we talked about identifying our limiting beliefs at the beginning, which is to start with goals, right? What are the things that you really want and that you really want to prioritize and the impact that you really want to have? Like in prioritizing, here are my core things, right? Are there things on that core list that you feel like you aren't doing? Because I think it's okay to give 80% of something that's not on your core list of priorities. It's okay to not give your all. And so that's a question there for you is there something that you're like, this is a real goal of mine, right? That's not this past, like maybe I wanted to learn Japanese or maybe running. Maybe those things are on your current list of like, this is what I really want to go after. But like, do you have something that you really want to go after right now that you feel like you aren't giving your all on?
Yeah, that's a hard one. In terms of like specific goals, no, but maybe like more of like input to output ratio, if you will, is like I feel to Kyle's point, like I get bogged down in minutia. And like I feel like my highest value to the world at this point is literally what we're doing right now, is doing this podcast. There's just some unusual mix of like my skills have worked out that like this adds a lot of value to the world. And I would love to actually be doing more of it, but I'm not producing more episodes because of all this other stuff that I'm bogged down in.
I think, Brad, maybe if you could pause and take like a long-term look at your life and ask yourself at your funeral, would you be upset if people didn't say how great you were at speaking Japanese and what a great runner you are? And I
Oh, that's been,
think the answer probably would be that you wouldn't care. That's not your kind of purpose.
yeah.
It's not your dharma in life. And so giving 80% and deciding to move on from those fun hobbies is okay. I'm the same way about dance classes. I take dance classes. I'm the worst one in class. I show up 2/3 of the time. It provides a lot of fun in my life, but nobody at my funeral is going to say she was an incredible dancer.
I love that. That's really helpful.
Yeah. And I actually wonder if there's a question to be asked of, do you feel like you should read every email or that you should do these things on the list that feel like minutia to you? And is there a way to not do them? And would it be okay to not do them so that you would be able to do more of what's in your zone of genius to make more of an impact on the world in the ways that you want?
Yeah. It's funny as you're saying that, I'm thinking of it as like a trade-off. So yeah, if it were a simple trade-off of, hey, look, I can't be responsible for checking the show notes to make sure it's updated, or updating credit card information on the website, or responding to every email, and I was trading that off for, oh wow, I can really just focus on the podcast. Like that sounds like a slam dunk. I would do that in a heartbeat, So I think it's becoming clearer and clearer as we talk. That's what's so cool about like talking through this live, is the solutions kind of appear, right? And I mean, this is a fairly abbreviated period of time, 10 or 15 minutes at most. But yeah, it's funny. Something that I've pondered and kind of stressed about for months or years can just kind of, oh, wow, that's fairly obvious once you apply any scrutiny to it, right?
And I think that's the power of strategy 6, is bringing a like-minded community around the challenge. People can see it in different ways because we are our own worst critics. So, Brad, I want to turn it back to you to wrap this up, to say, what is the empowering belief that you would articulate now that we've had this conversation?
Yeah, I think I would really just change this entirely, which is, I like that phrase you use, because I never would have come up with it, but that zone of genius. And how can I focus on where I'm uniquely qualified and useful in this world, which is creating this podcast? And how can I put aside my shoulds to create more potentially world changing content, and not feel guilty about it at the same time? Like it's the biggest win in the world.
Yes. Mic drop.
I would just say, this doesn't have to be recorded, but the value that you've brought to my life, Brad, I think some of that other stuff should just be let go. Like, what you're doing, what you and Jonathan created is just changing people's lives drastically. And I think it's time to offload some of the stuff that doesn't let you up. Like Doc G did this, right? He didn't want to do all the doctorate stuff. So now he just does hospice and that's it. So knock out some of the stuff you don't want, because what you create here changes people's lives. But you're only as good as the energy that you have to do so.
Yeah, I like that. And it's funny because in the back of my mind, right, and I think what's so great about an exercise like this is hopefully it makes everyone realize that we all have these limiting beliefs, no matter who we are, no matter how much quote unquote success it looks like. Like, I mean, I struggle with this every single day. And yet it can be overcome. And just like you said, that the supportive community, I think like that's what we're doing here, very specifically here on this episode, but also here in the larger Choose a Fi and Fi community. It really is better when we do this together, when we go through life together, when we share our wins, when we hopefully work through problems and things. And I think it's okay for everyone to understand that, like, we have these internal conflicts and they're okay. We all have them. We're all human. This is perfectly okay. It's normal. It's expected, but we can help each other. And yeah, I was not anticipating this when we hit record, but yeah, this has been immensely helpful for me. Hopefully Samantha and Kyle got as much out of it as I did, but this has been amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Thank you guys. So great.
Yeah, and just like you said, mic drop. So I'd like to throw it to you for the last word, since this has really been so super helpful.
So, first, I want to thank Samantha, Kyle, and Brad, all of you, for being vulnerable and sharing something that was challenging for you so that we could share this example with the rest of the community. I think it will impact a lot of people. And one thing that I would say, if you are interested in this and you're saying, oh, I need to work through my own limiting beliefs, I need to figure out what they are, and I need to work through the strategies. I did recently create a 6-day email course that will walk you through the process of identifying your limiting beliefs and then working through each step, as well as getting some input from me. I'm going to be making videos throughout it when I get limiting beliefs from people and putting those videos up on YouTube to actually talk about how I would work through each of those things. So you'll get that community support component during this as well. So you can find that in the show notes and on my website at thefioneers.com/email-course.
Awesome. Okay, we definitely will have that in the show notes. I know sometimes it's hard, certainly, to remember URLs, but the fioneers.com/email dash course, but we'll have that in the show notes so you could just click through it, which is the nice, easy way to do this. That sounds incredibly, incredibly helpful. And yeah, we'll have all the links in the show notes for sure, anything we talked about. And actually, one last thing before we go is, Kyle, I saw this on your email signature. I know you did not ask me to say this, and didn't know I was going to bring it up, but it looks like you are a published author, and it looks like it actually just came out in the last couple of months. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I started writing it when we only had one kid, and thankfully that was the case because I wouldn't have had time after two. But basically, it was like we talked about in the show. If I get hit by a bus and, I'm gone, I have nothing to leave behind, this is what I want to leave behind to my girls. It's about time-tested principles to live your best life. And it's not just for my girls. I wrote it to be just for them, but after I wrote it, I was like, okay, this is pretty good. So it's for everybody. Live our best lives. And it's actually funny, Samantha mentioned the funeral overview because that's chapter 14 about legacy.
No kidding. Nice. And the book is called Wherever You Go, There You Are, and by you, Kyle Collins, and we'll have that in the show notes as well. So yeah, super cool. Congrats on publishing that. And yeah, I know you alluded to that in the episode, but yeah, I wanted to very specifically talk about it. So really neat. It's just always amazing to see what people in our community are doing. So yeah, huge congrats to you.
Thank you so much, guys.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Jess, as always, a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. And Samantha and Kyle, really appreciate you being part of the community and being here and us kind of working through your limiting beliefs, you helping me work through mine. This has been wonderful. I think it's going to be really valuable.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And Brad, thanks for having me again and accepting my proposal.
Anytime. No, it's wonderful. I love these amazing ideas. So, okay, until next time, thanks for listening.